I think this is a fundamental change.
Promulgation of the Constitution.
Hello and welcome to the second episode in our series, The Evolution of a Nation, a documentary series chronicling Uganda's social, economic and political history. I'm Bat Kakoza. In the previous episode, we focused on political events in the period from 1944 to 1950. We saw the role of Uganda's World War II veterans in the initial agitation for self-rule, the growing Asian community economic power, the 1944 Bataka uprising, the 1949 Buganda riots, and the advent of the two key political activists, Ignatius Musazi and Jole Kiwanuka. We ended with Governor Cohen banning Musazi, who at that time was in Britain, from returning to Uganda. In this second episode, we look at Musazi's growing popularity, the advent of political parties, and the 1953 Kabaka crisis. The Local Government Ordinance of 1949, which divided Uganda into 18 districts, gave considerable powers to local African administrators. Many regions attained substantial degree of economic self-sufficiency.
And I think it was a milestone in the history of Uganda in the sense that it also allowed the establishment of local councils in Uganda where they had not been, because hitherto there were only councils in kingdom areas. But since 1949, there were councils in other districts of Uganda, although they were not so democratically elected, but it was a milestone.
Andrew Cohen became governor of Uganda in 1952. Prior to that, he had been under-secretary at the Colonial office in London. In that capacity, he had earned the reputation of being dynamic and very positive to the decolonization of Africans. Two major principles guided Cohen's administration. One, the belief that it was urgently necessary to increase the participation of Africans in the formulation and implementation of government policy at all levels of government. Secondly, that Uganda must move towards independence as one unit and not to fracture into several rival tribal states. There had been strong fears that the Kingdom of Buganda might want to sever itself from the rest of the colony from around 1949.
Governor Cohen, who became the governor of Uganda in 1952, was actually, in a sense, we could say, progressive. And I think he was from the Labour Party. And it seems the international climate was emerging that was such that there was going to be independence anyway. So I think the British thought that there was need for the Africans to organize and get independence sooner than later and under the British control. So they didn't want a scenario where possibly if they continued closing the political space, you would have agitators who are radical enough to take Uganda into the communist camp, considering that that was the period of the Cold War.
On the 22nd January 1951, I.K. Musazi, president of the banned Bataka party, who had been prohibited from returning to Uganda from Britain, defied the governor's orders and returned. He was immediately arrested by police at Entebbe International Airport and taken into police custody.
So he forced his way. He came here. He was arrested and put in jail. The third time.
He was subsequently deported to Moyo in West Nile, where he was kept for 3 months under strict orders not to leave the region. The governor subsequently rescinded the order and allowed Musazi to return to his home in Uganda. The intermittent detention of Musazi made him even more determined to oppose colonialism. He identified a spot in the city center where him and his colleagues held open rallies calling for granting Uganda self-rule. People gathered under the shade of an oak tree that was consequently named the Tree of Liberty.
The Tree of Liberty was in the old park. where today taxis get out of the park to head for Mulago, for Kawempe, that corner there. That's where the tree was. Yes. And it's at that tree, under that tree, that the politicians were building big political platforms to address the masses. Mind you, the old park at that time had no buildings there. It was just swamp. It was just kind of grass. So the people used to gather around there. And that tree was where the politicians were addressing the masses.
Together with the Tree of Liberty, a bell became a powerful mobilization symbol that was closely identified with the two activists, Musazi and Joseph Kiwanuka, popularly known as Jolly Joe.
Kiwanuka was a forceful speaker, and he would ring the bell, bo, 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 3 times. Then everybody was, so they started talking. She was a first class. I mean, you could even drive the masses mad after ringing the bell.
Former Prime Minister of Uganda, Kintu Musoke, was one of the young men who was transformed by Musazi's addresses.
I.K. Musazi denounced imperialism, denounced colonialism, denounced, and since at school, at King's College, I was a member of the scouting movement. And when I had this denunciation of colonialism, I decided never to obey, never to pay homage to British imperialism. And I left the scouting movement, because in the scouting movement, we are supposed to pay our loyalty to God and the Queen.
In 1952, having mobilized a big number of followers in Uganda and other parts of the country, Musazi and his colleagues realized that the time was ripe for them to organize their movement into a formal anti-colonial party.
He said, I tried to organize a trade union, it failed. A farmers union, it failed. I think the only way is let's organize so that we get rid of all these people. Then they leave our country free for us to do what we want. Otherwise, we shall never ask, and these people give us what we want. So that's when he formed the Uganda National Congress. After the Congress, like the African National Congress in South Africa, and the Indian National Congress in India. And that was the model. He assembled his team. Himself, President General. Yoxfati Nguru from Lango. He was the dispenser. He's a deputy. Kununka, Dr. Kununka from Bunyoro, his treasurer. He got hold of Abu Mayanja, who had just been expelled from Makerere, and made him, says, you forget all about that. You come, let's fight for independence. Our children will study. He made him the Secretary General. He got Okwerede from Teso. He got Abanya from West Nile. He got Awola from Acholi. He got Nyamaso from Chigezi. Another one from Toro. So he assembled his executive. And now, he says, now this is the movement that is going to chase the British out.
And of course, the same network of young people were the one who took the politics of independence, the anti-colonial agitation beyond Buganda to other parts of the country. So from the part of the country from which I come, from Acholi, for example, Mzee Peter Ola became a very important member of UNC, and he then took the anti-colonial politics to Acholi. That was part of Musazi's group. Yoko Safati Engo took this to Lango.
I joined the party after it had been formed on the slogan, independence now. They used to call it self-government. Self-government now. Of course, this was a new idea, even amongst the Ugandans themselves, because those who did not have the vision, would say, how can you demand for independence when you cannot even make a razor blade?
Meanwhile, another call for a separate independence came from unlikely source, the unpopular Kabaka Mutesa II, who in 1953 defied the British by vigorously opposing the proposed federation of Uganda with Kenya and Tanzania. This was the second attempt following one that aborted during the reign of Kabaka Daudi Chwa. Behind this was the Buganda concern that federation would mean the loss of their special status.
The road to independence seemed clear from the 1950s, and especially in the eyes of Cohen, that Uganda was going to be a united Uganda, and therefore Buganda was going to be just a province or a district of Uganda equal to others. And Buganda did not want that status of being equal to others. They wanted to maintain their privileged position that had been conferred upon them by the 1900 Buganda Agreement.
The British wanted to impose an East African Federation on Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania. And the late Kabaka Daudi Chwa spearheaded a very strong opposition towards an East African Federation. He was saying, look, don't forget, you British, that I have an agreement with you. The agreement we made in 1900. Now we want to introduce a bigger union, bigger administrative union. And what will happen to this agreement, which is tying you and me? So the British were puzzled, and he said, we can't accept it. They listened to him until he died. The thing had been shelved. Now, Mutesa, his son, succeeds him. And in 1953, the British wanted to resurrect the idea of a federation. And while the Kabaka was still in England, attending the coronation of the Queen, there was a kind of a dinner in London at which the then Colonial Secretary made a speech and said that they should not forget that the idea of an East African Federation was still alive. Now, that speech was reported in the then East African Standard, and the Ugandan people read the speech. Mengo also read the speech. They picked up immediately. The Kik was summoned, and they again opposed this idea of bringing back this idea of the federation. They wrote a very big memorandum to the governor, Sir Andrew Cohen. Then the Kabaka was not here. Now, when he came back, they briefed him about the whole matter. He too sent a long memorandum to the governor and said that Buganda can no longer tolerate this kind of attempt to federate Uganda with the rest of the other people. And said, by the way, why don't you people, the British, why don't you give me my independence of Buganda?
The federation was going to be not of the Europeans, but of the African people. And as you know, and later on, during the struggle for independence, even the Tanzania, Tanganyika, led by Nyerere, Nyerere had offered to delay the independence of Tanganyika, if that could bring about the federation of East Africa. So, parochialism, Buganda parochialism.
But at that time, under the constitution, the Kabaka was actually nominating some Buganda members to the leg school. So he said, I will no longer nominate anybody to represent my kingdom to the legislative council. So the governor considered these very serious issues, and he started to meet the Kabaka. They had about 6 meetings. These were private meetings. The kingdom did not know, the Rukiko did not know. It was only the Kabaka and his 3 ministers. And the talks were being held in Entebbe, Government House. So in the end, the governor and the Kabaka did not agree, because the governor thought that he had convinced the Kabaka to the extent that they should sign a joint communique allaying the fears of the Baganda. The Kabaka said, I can't sign. I must first consult my Rukiko. The governor gave an ultimatum to the Kabaka, said, you either agree to sign the joint statement with me without consulting the Rukiko, or I'll take this as being disloyal.
He said, were I to affix my signature on the document in question, I should be nullifying my whole position with my people as their Kabaka.
To the British, that was disloyal and disrespectful of the governor, and referring to the 1900 agreement, which stipulated that for the Kabaka to be respected and Buganda to be respected, they had also to respect or to follow and be loyal to the colonial state.
So he withdrew recognition from him. And then after that he said, I can't keep you here because your position has now changed in the eyes of me and Britain. You are no longer Kabaka. All this was prearranged. The Royal Air Force plane was waiting for the Kabaka. When they disagreed, he was just loaded on and flown out. The Rukiko did not know. The Baganda did not know. It is only the ministers. There were 3 ministers, particularly the Umrams and the Omwani who used to be to accompany the Kabaka. And the governor locked them up in Government House, which is now State House, so that they should not come to announce that the Kabaka had been taken. It's only at around 4 in the evening when he let them out. Then they come to announce in the Blange. They collected the workers of the Kabaka's departments, and they said, look, our Kabaka is gone, and they were all in tears.
The Baganda got thunderstruck by the news of the deportation, and a profound sense of pain and shock overwhelmed the kingdom.
The Rukiko passed 3 resolutions. The first resolution, he said, we still believe that Kabaka Mutesa is still our king. 2, we shall not elect a new Kabaka as long as Mutesa is alive. 3, we are sending a delegation of the Rukiko to London to fight for his return. They chose 5 people to go and struggle to convince the British government to get the Kabaka back.
Buganda became ungovernable. The supporters of the Kabaka and the monarchy decided to make Buganda ungovernable, and the British could not tolerate it any further. They had to make arrangements to return the Kabaka, but under a negotiated arrangement.
Although his fame had dwindled, the exiling of the Kabaka made him a very popular figure.
The majority, almost all the Baganda, they were all united together during those 2 years that the Kabaka remained in exile, to the extent that some of them started growing beards, not to shave, and grow thick hair. Some other people even stopped going to church.
All the politicians, those who were in opposition to the Kabaka, and everybody supported, went behind the support, gave support to the Kabaka.
The petition that was signed throughout Uganda demanding that the British return the Kabaka to Uganda. It was the UNC, the Musazi boys, who were sent to different parts of the country, to West Nile, to Acholi, to Ankole, to Kigezi, to Karamoja, to collect signatures for that petition.
In 1954, Queen Elizabeth II visited Uganda. Beside the governor, other colonial officers and lurers from other kingdoms that turned up at Entebbe International Airport to receive the Queen, the 3 regents of Buganda, PM Kavuma, Matayo Mugwanya, and El Mpaji were also present. Later, during the reception that was held at State House Entebbe, Kavuma delivered the following speech on behalf of the kingdom.
It is a matter of personal sorrow to the people of Uganda, whose spokesman I am, that our majesty cannot be received today by our own ruler, the Kabaka, as we so deeply wished. But our private sorrows cannot mar the happiness we feel at seeing your majesty, our midst.
The major purpose of the Queen's visit was to inaugurate the 150,000 kilowatt Owen Falls hydroelectricity scheme at Jinja. The Queen noted,
"This power will serve the industries which are already in being and others which will be established in future. Without power there can be no economic development, and without power no country can go forward in the modern world."
Meanwhile, the Luchiko delegation was in England negotiating with the British government to have the Kabaka returned.
The delegation convinced Britain to appoint a constitutional expert, Professor Keith Hancock, to fly to Uganda here and get the Uganda delegation and the government representatives together to review the 1900 agreement. They used to sit at Nemirembe's, the bishop's house. And that's why that conference was called the Namirembe Conference. And in the end, they produced a report which was presented to the Rukiko and the governor. The Rukiko made some amendments in the report, and these amendments were accepted by the British government. And then a new agreement to replace the 1900 agreement came up.
Among many issues in the Buganda 1955 agreement were the British dropped the inclusion of Buganda into the proposed East African Federation. The Kabaka was recognized as a constitutional monarch. The Kabaka rescinded his earlier decision not to nominate Buganda representatives to the Legico, and the British would bring back the Kabaka.
There was a clause in that agreement of 1955 that when the new constitution begins to be implemented, there shall be no major changes in the political matters of Buganda and Uganda until after 6 years. And in 62 is independence. So it set a timetable and in fact not for Buganda only, but for the entire Uganda. So there was a new situation. And Kabaka came back.
Mutesa's triumphal return and the rousing welcome accorded to him by his subjects clearly manifested a triumph for Buganda. The 1953 crisis made the Kabaka a very popular figure for standing up to the British.
There were celebrations everywhere. Even these breweries had prepared some special beer for the celebrations, which was stronger than the normal beer. So I took a few bottles myself and I passed out. By the time I woke up the next day, I asked, "Hey, is Mutanda back? Is the Kabaka back?" He said, "Oh, he came back." So that is what happened everywhere. People just celebrated. They were so happy, all over the country.
Similar agreements were also signed between the colonial government and other rulers. On September 3rd, Andrew Cohen signed on behalf of the British government and the Mukama of Bunyoro, Sir Tito Gafabusa Winyi IV, on behalf of himself and his successors, the Rukurato and the people of the Kingdom of Bunyoro. Later, with the Mugabe of the Kingdom of Ankole, Charles Gasyonga, and in 1960, with the Mukama of Toro Kingdom, Rukidi III. In 1956, the Democratic Party, DP, another important political party, was founded by a Catholic Muganda called Matayo Mugwanya. Mutesa had rejected him as a candidate for prime ministership of Buganda because he was Catholic. And DP became a platform for grievances of Catholics who felt themselves to be second-class citizens. In other words, DP was essentially organized to redress the discrimination of Catholics.
Thank you very much.
Although he was Protestant, the late Professor Sentiza Kajubi was among the first members who joined the party to address the imbalance.
And there was also
a colleague, Kamlira, and then there was a Stanley member also joined, and we began to build up some Protestants to join together with the Catholics for reason. Why did we do that? Because we also saw that from the very beginning, the Catholics had not had a good deal in this country. A non-Protestant could not be Nganzi over Ankole, you could not be Chabazinga, you could not be Omukama Butoro, and so on. And you could not even be Katikiro at all. So I thought there was something to fight for.
Well, that marks the end of the second episode in the series The Evolution of a Nation, a documentary series chronicling Uganda's history from 1944 to date. In the next episode, we shall focus on the period between 1955 and 1959, the formation of the Democratic Party, the increased involvement of Africans in the Legiko, the dynamic political activities, and the economic development of the time. Thanks for taking time to be part of our wider audience. I'm Bat Kakoza. See you next time.